Before I get into the meat and drink of the video, which is to say explain why women are never going to settle, I think it's important at the outset to clarify and talk about a few things. There's been this trend that has existed in the manosphere since its inception, since forever, basically for as long as I can remember. And I've been around for quite some time, as most of you know, by internet standards. And that is this notion that women are somehow going to be punished for the decisions they make or don't make. That the absence of the men that they refuse to partner with will result in some kind of punitive measure. The reality is, unfortunately, that given the current sexual dynamics in the sexual marketplace, the vast, vast majority of men are just not terribly interesting to women, whatever they might think about themselves. And this trend, this description that I've offered, has existed, as I said, for a very long time in the manosphere. And it continues and persists in certain circles. For example, there's no doubt, whatever his sincerity, that a guy like Kevin Samuels, whose channel is beyond massive, 1.2 million subs, and tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of comments, that he's followed this trend as well. Often make remarks along the lines of, go find a dog or what have you. And I don't blame him for propagating what I think is largely a myth. I'll talk about that in more detail. Because have you ever seen his super chats? I mean, the guy is making insane amounts of money just by repeating these talking points. It's hard to blame him. But the reality is, the ultimate reality, is that women are never going to settle. And they're not necessarily going to be unhappier for that fact. Now, this needs to be teased out a little bit. I don't mean that women are not unhappy per se. On average, their general levels of contentment have sunk extensively over the last few decades. It's pretty well documented. But they're not unhappy because they didn't choose some guy that they thought was quote-unquote unworthy of them, or they didn't think was appropriate or sufficient for their standards. They're unhappy because they have certain standards which, unfortunately, are increasingly detached from reality that probably will never be fulfilled. However, the correlate of that is not to suggest that were they to settle with some guy that they deem as average or insufficient, that they would suddenly become content. That's the whole point. They're not content with the vast majority of men, whether it's an 80-20 rule or a 70-30 or whatever. They're not interested in the large majority of guys, and they don't want to couple up with them or partner up with them. So this idea that these women are missing out on those guys, most of us, frankly speaking, most men, I think is inaccurate. What is accurate is that, in general, they're less happy than they used to be. But why is this the case? Why is it the case that women probably will never settle? Well, you all know the word hypergamy. I've been talking about it for years, as have many people, and these days it's a household word. But it's also a consequence of the environment. At the end of the day, human beings, we human apes, are the byproduct of our genes and environment. When you tweak the environment sufficiently, you end up at times getting radical changes. It's not as if 200 years ago women were fundamentally different. This is a point I've made over the years again and again and again. It's just that the environment was different. I guarantee you, if we could somehow travel back in time, replace all the extant technology that existed back then with 2021 technology and all the things that are happening, yeah, you would pretty much get the same result. Human beings haven't fundamentally changed since then. So it's about women being exposed to a new environment and the choices they make as a consequence of being exposed to that environment. This is largely not conscious on their part. We are animals, all of us. Men are animals, women are animals, we're all animals. And so we're just following our instincts as a collective. Women follow their instincts as a collective too. It's just, as many people have pointed out, the dating and mating field has expanded tremendously. And as a consequence, of course, women feel, at least, that they can be a lot pickier, even though capitalizing that pickiness is going to be even harder than it used to be, precisely because of this new technological environment. And it's kind of amusing And interesting at the same time that people will sometimes suggest, oh, this woman's going to become an old cat lady or a dog lady or whatever. But the reality is, gentlemen, frankly speaking, that most of these women would be more content living a life alone with cats or dogs or what have you than to settle with a man that they deem is inappropriate. They're just not interested in that. They're not interested in good enough. They want something that meets their standards. Now, are these standards hyperbolic and out of whack and out of tune with reality? Oh, most certainly. That's not the claim I'm making. The claim I'm making is that women are not going to settle because they see these men that they have no interest in as being way below their standards. And they see themselves as putting themselves in a worse position by settling with guys that they believe are below their standards than they would be simply being alone. And it's true. You have women in their 30s, in their 40s complaining they cannot find any guys or they couldn't find any guys. But the reality is all these guys were invisible to them. And it's not to say, again, that these women are happy with the results of that. They're not, but they'd probably be even less happy and more bothered if they settled with the guys that they view as completely inappropriate for them, even if these expectations and these wants and desires do not reflect the reality that they live in or their own capacity to acquire a mate that they deem to be quote-unquote appropriate. Additionally, there are plenty of examples of somewhat older women who did quote-unquote settle. And what happened ultimately, in the majority of cases, they ended up divorcing their husbands. They weren't that happy. And so these days, increasingly, due to the dynamics of the sexual market, that probably isn't going to happen. That step of just marrying someone just because there are no other options is not going to happen. It's going to be an ongoing occurrence of date until you drop, essentially. And in the cases where the women don't find appropriate partners, they will, yes, settle for pets, or even, in some weird cases, partner up with other women. I've seen instances, for example, where women suggest house sharing, where multiple heterosexual women cohabitate in lieu of a marriage or formal partnership with men. So it's a tricky issue. This isn't about women coming to their senses. Their expectations clearly, in the majority of cases, are exaggerated and don't really map onto reality. Very few of the women who think they deserve a Brad Pitt or some such similar figure are living in reality. Now, many of the dumpier-looking women are living even further from reality because their looks and status matching, even if they do prefer and want to date and mate up, is so askew and so far away from the reality they inhabit that they probably will never be able to come to their senses. The term coming to their senses doesn't make sense, no pun intended. So what do we need to accept? We need to brace ourselves as a society for more of the same. This isn't going to improve. This is going to get worse and worse and worse. And if I were to pinpoint a particular thing or artifact that makes all this far worse than it otherwise would have to be, it's a recurrent theme in my videos, but the fact that human beings, human animals, human apes, however we want to term ourselves, we're just terrible at acknowledging our subconscious instincts, our animal nature, the things that guide us. We really think that we're in charge. We really think that somehow we have superseded our animal nature, our own biology, by dint of civilization. And that's simply not true. All it is a repackaging. What we've done in the current year, 2021, is taken the same human animal that existed 200 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, and repackaged him, put him in a new environment, and then we somehow delude ourselves into thinking, oh, we're fundamentally different. We've changed a lot. But we haven't changed a lot. We're much the same. And as many of you know, those of you who've been with me for a while, this is a point I've been banging on about for years now. Human beings lack self-awareness. And I don't mean self-awareness of their individual flaws and traits, although many of them lack that as well, but their basic nature as primates, as animals. Now, if that could be acknowledged and people could be made aware of that, maybe some of these problems could be mitigated. But that is not the sphere we're operating in, obviously not. We are very much operating in a fantasy land. It's a fantasy land that is detached from biology, detached from evolution, and detached from reality. Anyway, as always, thanks for tuning in. Please hit the like button, hit the sub button if you're not yet subscribed. Hit the bell icon to catch my videos in the future, and if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. You take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.